Thank you to the MedDevReg Summit and the AfriReg Summit for giving us this opportunity to be an association partner today. We are going to be discussing the transition to the IVDR. I'd like to introduce our esteemed speakers. Our first speaker will be Dr. Mina, who's the Regulatory Affairs Regional Manager for the region, Middle East, Turkey, Africa, Pakistan, and UK, and works for Abbott. She's got an impressive regulatory experience complemented by her strong commercial background in the Middle East region, and she's worked in very many organizations. Her career has just elevated her, and she's an esteemed member of the Regulatory Affairs Professional Society in the US, holds a diploma in ECTD Masterclass in Regulatory Affairs. Her dedication to professional development, Saudi Council for Health Specialists, and the European Pharma Consultant Group. Welcome, Dr. Mina, and over to you for your presentation.
Hello, good afternoon, everyone. Our esteemed authorities, dear colleagues. I hope we're all up, no one sleeping, fine. We're almost going into one of the very interesting topics, and I know it was a bit discussed in the morning, which is the transition, the EU transition. The discussion will be focusing on the in vitro diagnostics, the IVD transition. We'll speak about three main aspects: the transition timelines, important changes and improvement from the regulatory landscape and quality landscape, what to highlight to non-EU authorities, which is the most important part. Okay. Coming into more focus or zooming on the regulation of EU 2017/746, why especially IVDs? In the morning, we had a discussion from the EDA highlighting that with the screening of the IVDs, they managed to improve the status of hepatitis in Egypt from the red tear into the green tear. Okay, so there was improvement in health outcome with the screening. It's a direct reflection of the improvement in the health system in any country. The more use of in vitro diagnostics, whether as screening or as companion diagnostic within the course of treatment. I'll just state few important points to consider for all health authorities. Improvement in health economics, the more use of IVDs. Decrease in waste health system resources. You're decreasing the resources, decreasing the use of a lot of unneeded medication, and of course, decrease for the wait time of the patients. Okay, we all know about the transition, the EU transition timelines. They gave us 3 years for the medical device. Now I will focus on the in vitro diagnostics, which was 5 years transition period. Now we're in this part. Transition extension is only applicable for those products that were already placed on the market under the IVDT prior to the IVDR. IVDT is the In Vitro Diagnostic Directive, IVDR, the regulation, with the date of application of 26th of May 2022. Going more into depth to these timelines, this part is taken from the fact sheet. It was presented in the morning for the medical device. Now I'm presenting for the in vitro diagnostic into more depth. We already passed the May 2022 for the Class A non-sterile products. We are heading towards the deadline of 26th of May 2025, which is the end of transition for Class C products and products with a certificate issued prior this timeline as per the IVDD. What about the following timeline? It's May 2026 at the end of transition for Class C products and May 2027 for Class A sterile devices and Class B products. Okay, is it applicable for all? Is there any condition? Yes, there is 3 main conditions to be considered to benefit from this transition. The first one is that the device continue to comply with the previous regulation of the IVDD. So there is no major changes in the product, no significant change in the design and the intended purpose. At the same time, the product should still have a notified body certificate or declaration of conformity drawn up before 26th of May 2022. So these are the 3 main conditions which will make any products benefit from this transition timelines. Okay, is there any other updates? Yes, in 2023, this update was also discussed in the morning, but it worth to highlight it that the sell-off date or period was removed. What does this mean to us as manufacturer? What does it mean to the health authority? It means that whatever the product which was under the IVDD and still in the market, it can still continue be in the market. And it can still be sold off, whether through the distributors, through the patients, as long as it's still within the expiry date. It didn't expire yet. There is no sell-off period. This is one of the updates which was done in 2023 by the EU. What other changes which we need to consider? When we come to IVDs, remember there is 7 main changes in the IVDs, from the In Vitro Diagnostic Directive to the In Vitro Diagnostic Regulation. These 7 main changes, the first one is the risk classification. This is the gateway for all other changes, which reflects in the rest of the changes. There is product scope expansion, oversight and involvement of notified bodies. There is more stricter requirements for economic operators. There is a rigorous post-marketing oversight and surveillance. We'll discuss this a bit later within the presentation. There is, of course, an implementation of the UDI, and there is a more stricter rules for documentation and clinical evidence. A lot of work, yes? Would you agree with me? Anyone on the IVDs is really interested. There is a lot of work coming, and even the authorities will be looking at a lot of changes within the coming time. Classification, as I mentioned, it is the gateway for all the changes for the IVDs. This is one of the interesting slides. I've used it from the BSI, and it was used also last year, but I'm always putting it as one of the gateways to look into the changes coming. We have 7 rules for the classification of IVDs. The first 4 rules, excluding the B, C, and D, and then the lower risk. If the product, the IVD, for blood screening or a high-risk product, high-risk disease, directly goes to Class D. If it's blood or tissue compatibility and a high-risk also group, so it's Class D. If it's not a high-risk group, it's Class C. If it's for infectious disease, for cancer, for companion diagnostic, genetic testing, congenital screening, this goes as Class C classification. Then if it's a self-testing and a high-risk near-patient test, so it will be Class C. If it's not a high-risk patient, it's Class B. If it's a specific IVD reagent, instrument, specimen, receptacle, it's Class A. This is the lowest class. What about if it's nothing from the previous ones? So it's Class B. If it's a control with no assigned value, so it is also Class B. This is the classification rules, which we always need to highlight and look at it. What other significant quality and regulatory changes which the manufacturer need to consider and the authorities need to put in mind in their coming assessment? Apart from the risk stratification, which we discussed, of course, we all know that there will be a risk management system and quality management system. It's still in the process. Don't ask about it now, okay? It's still in the process. There is the EUDAMED. It was discussed in the morning. It's the European database, which comprises all what involves the product, from product registration, the post-marketing, changes, PSUR, marketing surveillance, SSP, okay? We'll discuss this a little bit more in the coming slides. This is the EUDAMED. What other significant changes also? It was discussed in the morning for the person responsible for regulatory compliance, and it was discussed, will he be legally responsible or no? And there is a more control and pre-market scrutiny for the in vitro diagnostic. What does this sentence reflect, and what does it comes and holding to us in the future in our preparation? If we speak about Class D and companion diagnostic, we need a commission assessment, okay, as we need a notified body assessment for all the technical file. Class D, it will need a competent authority assessment at a notified body, and of course for the technical file. Class B, notified body assessment with a review of represented with technical documents. Class A, self-certification with a notified body. In a nutshell, so we can make it easy for all of us, if we speak about Class E. A, it's EU Declaration of Conformity. Unless it is sterile product. Class B, it will require a quality management system assurance, assessment of technical documentation. Class C, it will require a quality management system assurance, assessment of documentation, and for companion diagnostic also it will require competent authority assessment. There is a line for all the products and a line for the companion diagnostic, which will require more strict documentation. What about Class D? the same like Class C, but there is a verification by an EU reference laboratory. This is the last part, which is required. There will be an EU reference laboratory. Well, it's good that there is only one time for assessment in the reference laboratory. It's not per country. It's one time per the EU, which will make it easy. And we hope we can leverage this approach, which is done by the EU as one cluster. What other changes? As I mentioned about the technical file, I'll go to a more interesting part, which is the pre and also post-marketing, which is the risk management file, performance evaluation plan, clinical evidence and performance evaluation report, post-marketing follow-up, summary of safety and performance, post-marketing surveillance plan, and of course risk management, PMS for Class A and B, and complaint trending reporting. As I mentioned, it looks to be a lot, but it's not that much. I'll take it stepwise, which will be easier for all to have a look on and to discuss it in a stepwise. Scientific validity report and the analytical performance report and the clinical performance report, these three reports will comprise into the clinical evidence and performance evaluation report, the PER. The post-marketing performance plan, the post-marketing performance evaluation report, these will contribute into the post-market performance follow-up. For our products, Class A and Class B, the reports which will need to be submitted is the post-marketing surveillance report, PMS. For Class C and Class D, we'll be submitting the PSUR, Product Safety Update Report, as well as the summary of safety and performance. This is in a nutshell. We've discussed a lot and we had slides with a lot of details, but in a nutshell, this is what needs to be presented to the authorities in the EU. Okay? The PMS and the PSUR comprise to the post-marketing surveillance. Now we are speaking about the risk management. I'm sure that it will, not all these reports will be submitted once. They're not all ready at the manufacturer end, but they're in the stage of transition, as mentioned earlier, with the transition timelines of the EU. What's expected from the authorities is that we already have these reports. Whatever is required, it will be extracted from this report. We're not expecting to submit new reports or new format or new template. It's what is there, we leverage what's there, and we try to benefit from what the strict authorities and stringent authorities have already done, and they have already published all this. We've discussed the first 2 points. We'll come to the points what to highlight to non-EU authority. Sorry. Okay. First, the documents which need to be shared with the non-EU authority. Manufacturer declaration in relation to the regulation. This is issued by the manufacturer, and it explains that the coverage of the compliance of the device and their manufacturer for the conditions of continued placing in the market and putting into service. We will share the timelines, where is our classification as per the EU, and this is the timelines which we are complying with, and a confirmation that we were already complying with the IVDD. This is the first document to be represented. Of course, a certificate of free sale. This certificate of free sale, there was always some sort of questions and argues, what is the country of origin? Now we are speaking about the competent authority, not the country of origin. The competent authority, where the manufacturer or the authorized representatives have the registered place of business. This is the competent authority which will issue the free sale certificate. It's also to be submitted to the authority. The third document to be submitted is a notified body confirmation letter. It's a confirmation that there is a written agreement, a formal agreement between the company and the authorized representative, and there is an appropriate surveillance being in place. We're already preparing the surveillance and we are ready for what's coming. A lot of changes, but you would agree with me that yes, intelligence is the ability to adapt to changes. How we will adapt to these changes, how we will acquire all these changes, and will integrate, how we will leverage whatever there, and will harmonize all our approach. I would like to thank you. I know that I hope it didn't take a long time. Thank you very much. This is my references. I've done a lot of research before presenting because there was a lot of references, a lot of changes, okay? And thanks to all my colleagues. Okay. There is any question?
Thank you so much, Dr. Mina, for a very informative presentation. I think there will be a lot of questions after this. But let us move on to our next esteemed speaker as well, Ms. Loshnee Vandayar, who is the Senior Manager of International Regulatory Affairs for the Middle East and Africa at Cepheid. She has worked in the medical device and IVD industry for over 15 years and is also affiliated to SALDA as one of our EXCO members. I'd like to call Ms. Vandayar to give her presentation.
Good afternoon, everybody. It is afternoon, right? So it's 4:45 in Cairo today. I hope you all are awake for this part of the IVDR transition presentation. I will be focusing heavily on what the impact of the IVDR is going to be for our regulatory authorities across the continent. So thank you, Dr. Mina, for your in-depth presentation. I would like to start by saying the IVDR broadens the definition of IVDs and, as Dr. Mina mentioned, introduced a new risk-based classification. As a result, we will have a large amount of notified body review for risk classes. About 90% of IVDs will be reviewed by the notified bodies, as opposed to 10%, which was what we saw under IVDD. So what does an extended definition of risk class mean for industry and for our regulatory authorities? It means that products that did not require a notified body review previously will now require a review. And what we can also expect is some products may move into higher risk classification categories. As Dr. LYDIA mentioned, there will be a crossover period because of the removal of the sell-off period. So national regulatory authorities can therefore still receive IVDD and IVDR compliant products in country. There we go. IVDR guidances issued by regulatory authorities therefore need to potentially provide for dual classified products of the same product under IVDD and IVDR that may be in their countries. During the remaining validity of an issued registration certificate, a device can be covered by both a IVDD directive certificate and a regulation certificate. Certificates of free sale may therefore be issued with the corresponding certificates under both IVDD and IVDR due to the removal of the sell-off period. Both types of certificates of free sale will be valid. So what about reliance and abbreviated registration? As regulators in countries outside of the EU that import devices from the EU, our Africa regulators need to be informed on the timelines for IVDR implementation. In order to avoid any kind of supply chain disruption, as well as to avoid impact on patient treatment and care within the African countries, it is suggested that our regulators plan and communicate any IVDR changes, and as well as their impact to their health institutions, their procurement bodies, and most importantly to customs officials, especially on any transitional provisions that they plan on putting into place. What our regulators can consider is their reliance processes and potentially abbreviated registration processes, considering what a large number of IVDs will now be going through a notified body review. Now I'd like to talk a little bit about labeling. As Dr. LYDIA mentioned, there will be changes in labeling. The requirements of the new regulation will trigger these changes, and some of these changes will include the inclusion of UDI, an indicator if your product is a single-use device, an indicator if there's near-patient testing. For many IVDs, it will include a new notified body number, and for self-testing, it will contain contact details for advice and assistance that the user may reach out to. Regulators need to be aware and informed of this, as well as the timelines under which both IVDD and IVDR labeled product are going to be entering their country. Again, to avoid supply chain issues and adverse effects on public health if diagnostics cannot enter the country, our regulators should look at potentially including transitional provisions for dual label product in their country, as well as informing all customs officials of what these transitional provisions will be and the timelines that they will operate under. The IVDR identifies the information that needs to be included in the IFU or the instructions for use. This is to ensure that the users are aware of what the intended purpose of the device is, what its proper use is, and any precautions that need to be taken. Devices that are CE marked under IVDR will have additional information included in the IFU as compared to devices that are CE marked under the IVDD. What is the impact of this? Since both IVDD and IVDR compliant products may be imported into African countries, we definitely will require transitional provisions or guidances to provide for the same product with different IFUs and potentially different intended purposes. The same product may also have a different catalog number or a different SKU. Changes to product SKUs that are not driven directly by the IVDR, but they can be expected as a consequence of the IVDR transition. Some of the updated documents that we expect, as Dr. Mina mentioned, is notified body certificates, new declarations of conformity with information such as UDI and any common specifications listed on it, new certificates of free sale, which will cover essentially the same devices as before, but how the products are identified on the certificates of free sale is very important. UDIs and catalog numbers may change for the same products under IVDR, as I've mentioned previously. IVDD and IVDR issued certificates of free sale will both remain valid, and our hope is that the African NRAs will accept both of these. So what are the impact of changes? We had a lot of discussion, I think, through the day on variations and changes in the different countries and how they are approached by the different regulators. So the impact of changes due to IVDR transition will vary across our different jurisdictions on the continent, depending on what our local NRA requirements are going to be and what their methods are for reporting changes to registered product. The changes arising from the IVDR transition are not expected to influence safety or performance of the product, and generally the suggestion by industry and trade associations are that they are considered non-significant. However, as I mentioned, change regulations vary, and some changes are reportable, or some countries require all changes to be reported, let me put it that way. So looking at the nature of the change, and if it's being derived from the EU IVDR transition, as well as the sheer volume of change notifications that regulators can expect coming out of the IVDR transition, regulators should consider a pragmatic approach to change reporting to avoid any kind of supply chain interruptions. One suggestion would be to consider publication, as I mentioned, of transitional guidelines on how the NRAs plan to approach these changes, and to simplify the change notification procedure specifically for changes that arise out of the EU IVDR transition. So what can our regulators do to ease the burden, right? I hope they don't mind I'm giving them so many suggestions today. So, the management of the IVDR transition-related changes are urgently needed, as I mentioned, to prevent disruption of product supply into Africa. Many of us are African by nationality. We have been born and brought up, raised in Africa. We know what our disease burdens are. We know the fight we're facing on this continent specifically. So given that the majority of IVDR changes are set to be non-significant, what our regulators can consider is allowing notification of multiple changes for one product under a single submission, notification of changes affecting multiple registered IVDs in one submission, not limiting the number of products in one submission if their change submission is exactly the same, or enabling immediate implementation of changes without the need to wait for approval of the notification. If our regulators are looking at standing by the pre-approval requirement for changes before implementation, this is also okay and necessary sometimes. But what they can consider in this instance is potentially a fast-track review process for IVDR changes, and they can consider a reliance method through recognition of references of approvals by other recognized jurisdictions. So if the manufacturer can provide proof that the proposed change has been assessed and approved by one of their recognized jurisdictions, the NRA can then make an informed decision and can either approve or reject based on an abbreviated review or waive the review entirely. I think the main point I want to make here is that our African regulators need to consider what our transitional provisions are going to be for IVDR, as well as allow the coexistence of products certified under both IVDD and IVDR in the near future. Aside from that, one of the biggest problems that we all face is with customs authorities. So I think for my last suggestion, it will be for NRAs to ensure they coordinate with the customs authorities to prevent any issues at the point of import and to prevent supply chain issues for product coming into the country. Some other considerations, which I did not have enough time to go through because I'm limited in how long I can speak. I did not include UDI, post-market surveillance, or essential principles and requirements changes, which are also arising from the IVDR as well as near-patient testing. But these are all points that need to be considered and will differ from IVDD to IVDR. And that's all from me. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ms. Vandayar, for your also informative talk and the tips that you've provided. I think at this point, I'd like to invite the regulators who are available, particularly from Tanzania, Ethiopia, and South Africa, to join our speakers so that we can have a bit of a panel discussion.
Sarah, do you want to invite them up and name them? They are ready to come.
Yes, please, if I may. So Mr. Christian Kapinga from Tanzania. Mr. Emmanuel Nkarumah from Ghana.
Sarah,
Mr. Abebe.
Sorry, Sarah, Mr. Nkrumah is not going to join us. He was supposed to be online, but you can continue with the next person.
Okay, thanks for that. Mr. Abebe Kassahun from Ethiopian Food and Drug Authority. And last but not least, Ms. Khanyisile Nkuku from SAHPRA, the South African Health Products Regulatory Authority. Okay, so thank you very much for taking the time to join this panel. I think I can perhaps share a comment that has come through from the audience online. And this is something that you discussed, Loshnee, around UDI. Someone in the audience has asked, will UDI be required for Class A IVDs? So perhaps someone would like to discuss this from their perspective.
Good afternoon, everyone. So from that question, with South Africa, we haven't been recognizing UDI. We're still discussing in terms of, our labeling requirements. We do have in-country requirements where our regulations state certain regional requirements for the labeling. So with UDI, currently that's an additional expect that regulatory authorities is expecting in South Africa. So with what other applicants have been doing is that they will fulfill the requirements for the regional ones, and in addition add UDI. And for low-risk medical devices like Class A, it's not mandatory to have UDI. But I would say that looking at the regional requirement, UDI is just an additional to what SAHPRA is expecting.
So from Tanzania, we do not recognize the UDI. So we have as I said before, we have the requirement for labeling that will suit our end users, and specifically to the products of self-test. Yeah. Sometimes some of the products we might require you to put to make sure that they're in the local Swahili language, so that it's understandable even to lay persons. So we do not recognize this, but we have the labeling requirement. Sometimes we accept the labeling that is coming or it's unique, but in very few products we require to have the additional labeling because of nature of the products. We emphasize on regulation on each product as it is, because unlike pharma, sometimes IVDs can be unique from one product to the other.
Thank you for those insights. I'd like to just stop in here, if from the audience, not people online, if there are any questions, if you'd like to raise them now for our panel. Okay, if there are none, so perhaps we should just hear from both regulators who are present, and I've just been informed that Mr. Abebe will not be able to join us, the Ethiopian representative, but perhaps we could hear from the regulators. How do they foresee this transition working, both in Tanzania and South Africa? I know from a SAHPRA perspective, Nkuku, you recently released a guidance document to the industry in South Africa, but perhaps you can give us some more insights on how this is going to work, the transition, and how SAHPRA is going to handle that. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that question. Yes, so with the guidance document that we published, was to let industry know that we are aligned with the transition, and as Ms. Loshnee presented, to say that with the impact that regulatory authorities should be accepting that with labeling, there will be different labeling coming in, with some IVDs still having the IVDD labeling and some still having IVDR. So as South Africa, we have put in place to say that as the manufacturer, communicate with the regulator to say, this is how we plan to have a transition and this is our timelines. That way, when we are dealing with customs, South Africa can be able to then say, okay, so with this applicant that they've submitted, especially with high-risk medical devices, whereby in South Africa, like for example, HIV test kits, they fall under high risk. Therefore, the requirements are much more than a low-risk medical device. With the requirements that we require, we'll then be able to know that for a certain product, this manufacturer has declared that this is their time frame. They've submitted a declaration of conformity. They've also submitted a self-declaration to let us know what is the process that they'll be following. So with South Africa, what we say is that communicate with the regulator, submit, and also the fact that we haven't started with registration. Companies are supposed to be updating their licenses. So in terms of their line listing, when they're updating, it's bulk changes that they'll be doing. Within that, they should put in a cover letter to say, this is exactly what we'll be doing, and these are the products that we'll be bringing to the country, and this is how we will fulfill, the transition period that will be happening. Yes.
Thank you. Perhaps I could hand over to Mr. Kapinga to give his perspective from Tanzania.
Yeah, so I personally see that IVDR has a lot to do with, there is a composition of a lot of work that to be done by notifying bodies, and unfortunately there are no approved notifying bodies in the country, in Tanzania. So everything that regards regulation of IVDs is to almost great percent done by the authority. So I think with the transitioning, we need first to like whatever we are saying with the Lions, we need first to capacitate the NRIs. As I'm saying, make sure that they're aware, and then capacitate. But we are currently reviewing our guideline documents. They are actually in the final stage of approval, and then we have the compendium guidelines, which in it will include almost 13 guidelines, which to the great part will include the whatever is being in the transitioning. So it's in the review. We hope it's going to be out very soon. But I'll repeat again, everything should be as mandated in the legal framework. We'll get to that. And we are also currently updating our regulations, because we had one regulation that was covering both parts of regulation of IVDs. Now we want to divide that regulation, so to have several regulations, so that to cover market authorization, licensing, PMS, and vigilance and the like. And if there are critical issues, they should be first captured in the regulations so that they be reflected in the guidelines.
Okay. Perhaps I should ask Dr. Mina and Ms. Vandayar if they've got any additional comments or tips or questions for both regulators.
Thank you, and thanks for this discussion. I just have a question for this session and the previous one. I'll discuss about the desk audit for the site. Is this one of the options there, so it can be done remotely instead of the site inspection and visiting the site?
Again, the question of site audit.
Now it's desk. It's not there.
Yeah, so this, when you're a regulator, you should expect this question wherever you go. Is locally and even overseas, you should expect this question. But with IVD, the risk is higher. The risk is higher with IVDs. So if I were stringent in medical devices, maybe to the 50%, I should be almost 95% to IVDs. Considering desk audit. Considering the risk. So with desk audit, you mean desk assessment? Yes, with desk audit, now...
I'm just suggesting an option.
Yes, I said this before, but desk audit, again, it will depend so much. It will depend where the product is manufactured.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I'm sharing an option.
Yeah.
Okay? I'm not asking, not considering the question.
Yes. So I'm even commenting, basically it will depend where the product is manufactured. Where the product is manufactured, how many stringent regulatory have inspected the same facility. And it's difficult to get the report from these authorities. For example, if US FDA has inspected the facility, if we ask them to share with us the report, maybe it might be difficult because of confidentiality issues and the like. So we do desk assessment. We do desk assessment for some of the facilities. So you apply normally, and then we'll tell you if your facility is qualified for desk assessment or not. So we are still doing desk assessment, and it was a great lesson during the pandemic. This is why we said, we are not thinking maybe properly. Maybe we should at least think in the other way. So we are doing that. But and in some of the situation with IVDs, we might waive the assessment, the audit. The audit itself. Yes, the audit itself. We might audit. It will depend.
That's good.
Yes.
Thank you, Christian. So I just want to take Christian and Khanyisile a little bit out of the hot seat, which they've been in since they sat down. I think a lot of us, like I mentioned in my presentation, are from Africa. And if you know the history, of Africa when it comes to medical devices and IVDs, a lot of countries have been dumping grounds for expired or products that are not of good quality, and that has had a huge public health impact. So while I am from industry, and it is difficult to go through whether it's a desk audit or a site audit, I do have an understanding of where this requirement is coming from, specifically from our East African regulators.
Yeah, and thank you for that. And this is why I was also trying to explain, you know, as she said, Africa has been the dumping place for whatever you can name it, is substandard or maybe some falsification of the products. We had sometime the problem with HIV, RDT, and tracing. It originated somewhere, I don't want to mention it, somewhere, and the product was already in the market, thanks to the program that we are doing on collecting adverse events and the post-marketing surveillance program. So you collect a product, you take it to the lab, it fails the performance parameters. Just assume if you have the HIV test kit and its sensitivity is 60%. 60%. You understand what's the risk to the patients or to the public. So this is why, and another experience is some of the, because there's been some middlemen with this business with regard to medical device and diagnostics. So you find that the people doing business in the country do not meet the actual manufacturer. So they will meet the middleman. The middleman distribute those here to several people. You go to the manufacturer to inspect the facility as it is written in the application, says, I don't know, I've never taken this product to your country. I say, this is your local representative, I don't know him. You understand? So it is a big problem. This is why facility site audit is still very important. Very important to protect these more than 1 billion people that are in Africa.
Thank you, Christian. Yes, thank you very much. I have one or two more questions from my side. You know, I mentioned in my presentation that the notified bodies will be reviewing about 90% of IVDs. Do you think the regulators in our region, whether it's sub-Saharan Africa or whether it's East Africa, would be considering leveraging the notified body review as part of the IVDR transition to reduce the amount of resources that will be needed at the regulator and the amount of effort that will have to be put into reviewing all of these documentation, if it's already been done by a notified body?
So in terms of South Africa, we are part of the IMDRF. We're recognized as an affiliate member. So we have been in talks with other regulatory authorities in terms of how South Africa can start registration and to ensure that we don't have a backlog. As we know, South Africa has quite a number of IVDRs that are coming to the country, and we are a pretty small regulatory authority. So having notified bodies or conformity assessment bodies can actually assist a handful in terms of reviewing the product for us. But the main issue and challenge that we have been facing is leveraging and having local in terms of having them assist to ensure that the products are in the market. So we are still discussing, it's not final. We are looking into having them assist the regulatory authority to ensure that there's no backlog and that the products are available as soon as possible in the market.
So, as I said, for example, in Tanzania, currently we don't have any notifying body that is doing some of the things on behalf of the authority. So I think And this has been always my argument. I think first we need first for all, we need first to capacitate the NRAs. Because they will need to accept some of the things that have been done by another person. How would they assess that if they are not capacitated? So my argument is first we need to capacitate the NRAs. The NRAs need to be capacitated, and as TMDA we have been doing that a lot. At least benchmarking some of the NRAs and that are coming to to Tanzania for learning and some capacity building. We have some memorandum of understanding with some of the NRAs that we are capacitating them. And several NRAs have visited us for capacitating, and we are capacitating them from where they are. Zambia, Botswana, Uganda, Burundi, and as we speak, Mozambique on the way to Tanzania, and so many of them. So the aim is to make sure that, because Tanzania is bordering most of these countries, is bordering Mozambique, is bordering Zambia. On borders. So my argument is to build the capacity. The NRA should first build the capacity of the people that they have, improve the human resources in terms of number, in terms of expertise, in terms of training, in terms whatever you can say, so that we can get to that you're saying. It is easy to do that in Europe or in whatever countries, because they have already they have a history. They are coming from somewhere to where they are now. So we need first to do that, and then we'll get to what you're saying.
Thank you, Christian. And thank you also for the extensive geographic knowledge among all the countries that surround Tanzania. I just have one more question, and this one is for Khanyisile. In South Africa, under SAHPRA, we're still building out our regulatory framework. Do we have any plan to include parts of IVDR within that framework to ensure that by the time we have publication and implementation of our guidelines, we're including the already transitioned EU regulation?
Thank you for that question. Yes, we are currently updating our medical device regulations, and we've published it again for a comment period. And what we've been doing is that looking at the EU transition for IVDR to ensure that the requirements are also included there. We know that a lot of our products that are in the country are imported from countries like the EU, and since the EU is one of our recognized jurisdictions, we want to be more aligned with them. So we are looking into ensuring that the transition requirements are also included in our device regulation, and also to publish guidelines that specifically talk to IVDRs instead of non-IVDs, you know.
Thank you. That's great to know this. So more coming. Okay. I'll just highlight on one point, which is capacitating with other countries. Okay, and I'll go into more depths concerning the local analytical analysis for the sampling or for the first. The burden for the companies to send these products, import them, the shipments, and then it might reach and the registration is not yet done, so the analysis cannot be done. We need to send another samples. There is a lot of hassles done. Is there any sort of harmonizing the effort and doing all these tests within one unified lab in the cluster? I've tackled this during my presentation in a small hint.
Yeah, I'm not sure how that possible could be, but you know, samples to be brought in the country. need to, as NRIs, maybe sit down and look at what we can do with regard to that. I know that is an issue comes to reliance. Is that correct? That comes again to reliance. You know, there are issues you need first to discuss and put on table, discuss and agree before you agree on reliance. There are several issues. But as I said, one of the most important aspects is capacitation of these, whatever's doing analysts or assessors and whatever. Now, with the issue of capacitating other NRAs, you capacitate them with looking at what they need to start with. For example, if the NRA doesn't regulate at all medical devices, or IVD, doesn't regulate at all, or they don't have any legal framework at all. Yeah. It doesn't say anything that regulates. Or there is only one person at the Ministry of Health that is just saying, this is medical just right, and then they get in the country. So there is a place to start with, and then get with them slowly. The WHO Global Regulatory Framework, I'm sure you're aware of that, suggests if you are starting with the regulation of medical device and IVDR and you are not regulating anything, what you should start with, which will include maybe licensing the premises, controlling importation and exportation. The issue of market authorization site audit comes later on, but you need to start somewhere. So it will depend that these people that are coming, what do they have? For example, I was currently consulting one of the NRA in guidance development guidance document, SOP and some of the documents, screening, checklist, and the like.
Okay.
Yeah.
Can we take the AfriSummit platform?
So in terms of that, I think one association that actually plays a major role in harmonizing requirements, it's the AMDF. So in terms of having local requirements for assessments, the different regulatory authorities can adopt what the AMDF is actually publishing, and that way we can accomplish having one lab assessing an IVD that can go to multiple countries. Yes, so I think Frank, I don't see him here. In country-specific requirements according to our regulations. That way, when products are registered in Tanzania, the South Africa doesn't have to go and redo, the work all over again. So I think the MDF will play a major role in that.
Thank you, Khanyisile.
Thank you for that. I've just got a comment. A question that has come online. The question that's come through is, why is a site visit needed if there's already a legitimate conformity assessment body certificate? For example, if the CE or FDA has approved, there's already been a site visit for product assessment approval. Why would an additional site visit then be required?
I think Christian has already answered this, where he said that sometimes, although there may have been an inspection out of the US FDA or another body, it may be very difficult for the NRA situated in Africa to get access to that report out from that inspection, and therefore it's almost, they cannot verify what was seen and what was corrected as a result of that inspection. Sorry, Christian, I answer on your behalf because I know you've been answering this question all day.
Yeah, I did hear you say that, Christian, but I think someone online might have missed it, but I think that does clarify the question. I do have another question from my perspective, I think for both the regulators. One of the most significant changes under IVDR is a heightened emphasis on clinical evidence. So manufacturers are now required to provide comprehensive clinical data to demonstrate safety and performance. This includes conducting clinical studies, post-market surveillance, and continuous monitoring of device performance. So how, as regulators, are going to deal with this? Can you maybe enlighten us a little bit about the clinical evidence factor?
Yeah, so we have been demanding that, and depending on the nature of the product, some of the products, for example, you need to demonstrate the clinical evidence by using the samples you have taken from the Tanzanians. Yes, you need to demonstrate that this product can work on Tanzanians because of some nature of the product. But some of the product you just need to provide the clinical, clinical that the product can work. You can do that by comparison study. Yes, comparison study of the product that has been approved from somewhere that it's working. Then you conduct a study to show that this product works clinically, and then we accept the report. Yes.
So it'll depend on the product and also the risk class of that product. But something to add is what has been uttered by the IMDRF on real-world data. And I think real-world data will play a huge role in PMS of a product, in helping the regulator, make a decision and continue to having products within the market. So it won't be just stopping at submitting it for market authorization, but then further on, what is the usability? How are patients reacting to and using that product? So real-world data is something that will be very impactful.
Great. Thank you so much. I've been asked by the organizers to wrap up the session, so perhaps we can take a last comment from each of the panelists so that we can wrap up the session. I think it's been very helpful. There's a lot of work to be done, but over to you each to give a last comment or concluding remark. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. And I think I will just do one quick concluding point for the NRAs to note. I think Christian spoke extensively about needing to capacitate the regulators in country, but I ask that you also recognize the influence you have on the customs officials and your engagements with them. Many of our East African countries have pre-verification procedures, and this also needs to be considered during the IVDD to IVDR transition because of the change in documentation. That's, I think, the last comment from me. Thanks.
I would like to thank you, really, and it's really good to know that there is more reliance and you're looking into the analysis to rely on other countries, which is really great. I would like to enforce it from now going on. I will discuss the same, okay? Also, it's good to know for South Africa, we'll be leveraging the EU approvals and you will be following the same timelines. Thank you for all this discussion and outcome.
Yeah, so I know from the industry stakeholders and regulators, we might be both want the same thing, but we might be having different interests with regard to any product. A manufacturer wants to sell the product. Our job is to make sure that the product is of good quality, it is safe, and it's performing so that we protect the public health. So in one point or another, we should come together and realize that. And I know there is so much issues on reliancy and the likes, but sometimes we don't want to go to there because of the issues that we are saying of protecting the public health. But I'm sure, as I said and she mentioned, if we capacitate the NRAs, I know medical devices and IVDs in some of the countries in Africa, it's not regulated. It's not regulated at all. So if we capacitate analyze, invest on training and the like, we might continue on protecting the people on Africa, which by one way or another, they depend on us, on our decisions that we are making every day to make sure if someone is taking the RDTs and test says I'm negative or positive, that means he's trusting on you. And we should not waste that trust and make sure that this, the public is fully protected, while we don't jeopardize accessibility of these products in the market. So issue is accessibility, and then it's quality, then it's performance. So we come there. Otherwise, thank you.
So for my end, I think if as regulatory authorities and if we can come together and have harmonized guidelines, I mean for Africa, it'll be a huge achievement if Africa can have its own MDSAP, where we'll be doing audits collaboratively and not just being in silos. Because I think the main barrier within Africa as well is that there's not enough extensive knowledge on reviewing medical devices. So for regulatory authorities that are well matured, they can assist the young ones that are still, in its infant stage, and to ensure that we also we have local manufacturers that are also, given the chance, and not only importers that are always looked at. So I think we still have a long way to go, but the fact that we've started walking, we're no longer crawling, it shows that there's a lot of light at the end of the tunnel. Thank you.
Thank you so much for wrapping that up, our esteemed panel, and thank you to the organizers for giving us the opportunity. I think our main aim from the regulatory as well as the industry perspective is to ensure that the health products, medical devices and IVDs are safe, efficacious and of good quality. I thank you for spending the time with us this afternoon. Thank you very much.